We're joined on the phone today by Richard Martin and Megan Hennessy. They are the folks behind Archeophone Records, and the new box set, Waxing the Gospel, is available now. Richard, how you doing today?
Dustin, I'm good. It's good to hear from you.
Thanks again, guys, for being on. And Richard, I'll start with you then and ask you about the new box set, Waxing the Gospel. And a lot of these recordings dating back to the late 1800s, definitely fascinating stuff.
Yes, they are. So we've got 102 recordings as early as 1890 and going up to 1900, divided into three categories. The first CD has commercial recordings. The second CD has celebrity recordings, by which we mean kind of one-offs by important evangelists. And the third CD is vernacular recordings. It's what people were doing with their own phonograph in their homes, and what, in one very special case, an amateur phonograph recorder did at the Ocean Grove camp meeting in 1897 when he made recordings of a lot of very well-known evangelists.
So these have to be some of the oldest recordings that are out there, I would imagine.
They are indeed. Material from the industry starts in about 87 or 88, 1888, the formal recording industry. Material from before 1890 is almost unheard of. And material up until, let's say, about 1893 is also very scarce, and it's not simply because it's old. In those days, if you wanted to hear a record, most people would hear it in a saloon or a Nickelodeon arcade, where you put the coin in the slot and you have ear tubes and you hear it that way. So most of the records were bought and played by professional exhibitors, and they would play them till they wore out, and then they throw them away and get new ones. And so material from that period is extremely rare, and when you do find it, it's usually played to death. But stuff from the, I would say, 97, 1898, 99, is, if you find old wax recordings, that's generally about the period you will still find some. So we did very well with our network of collectors and a couple of institutions that had a couple of things. Very generous people who are committed to disseminating this old sound.
Yeah, it's excellent that you guys were able to find all these recordings and put them together for the public. And I know the label has put out a lot of stuff like this in the past. And Megan, I guess I'll direct this question to you. Can you tell us a little bit about the label and I guess how you guys got started and some of the stuff you've put out in the past?
Sure. Waxing the Gospel is actually our 68th release. We got started around 1998, and we realized, as we started collecting more records, basically, we realized that there was this huge amount of material that was falling through the cracks that nobody knew about. Nobody knew the records existed. No one had heard them. There was no scholarship on them. And we realized at some point, fairly early on, that the period before 1925 was where we wanted to focus. There was this gap, and we wanted to try and open it up. And so we've had a couple releases go later, but by and large, anything before 1925 is fair game for what we do. We do spoken word, we do comedy, we do pop songs, we do ragtime, we do sacred recordings. Pretty much anything that we think there's a great story to tell, we try to tell the story. And so we've got 68 releases and have a total of 12 Grammy nominations for our catalog, 5 for Best Historical Album and 7 for Best Album Notes. And we try to include, I mean, it's part of the value we want to give, part of telling the story. We try to include extensive liner notes and original scholarship. So this release is in a 408-page hardback. I would say it's the most significant thing we've ever published.
Yeah, it's definitely a great looking and a great sounding set. Again, we're on the phone today with Richard Martin and Megan Hennessy from Archeophone Records. And talking about the new box set, Waxing the Gospel. And I got to ask you guys, I guess, where do you find these recordings? Are they out in the wild? Do you find them at thrift stores, or are people bringing them to you, or how do you stumble across them?
Well, in some cases, we have our own collection as a starting point. Some releases we do, we kind of know what should be on it. If it's something by a specific artist, or we have a series where we go year by year. But over the years, we've built up a network of great collectors who are very committed to, one of a kind, really special items, and they're committed to sharing their records, sharing the stories of their records. And those folks have approached us and said, I've got this great thing from 1892. Does it fit into any of your projects?
Well, I imagine when it comes to preserving these and transferring them over, it must be quite the process in itself with recordings this old. How does that work, I guess, to make sure you're not, destroying the originals when you bring them over?
Well, the first thing you got to wrap your mind around is that in one of the technologies, disc technology, which goes back to about 1890, the first very primitive discs were made by Emil Berliner in 1890. You can play on a modern turntable. Techniques is a name that a lot of people have. You can play anything made from 1890 up till the present day on the same turntable. Now, you have to use the right stylus and all that, but the basic mechanics of it, put a disc on a felt or rubber mat and have it rotate and put the needle on it. That doesn't matter. From the dawn of discs to today, you can play on the same turntable. Digitizing it properly, using the right stylus to get around surface noise and wear. These are the technical considerations that one has to make. But the proposition is fairly straightforward there. Cylinders are a little bit different. Cylinders, you've got to have a special setup. Now, you can buy a device that you plug into a vintage machine and take an electronic transfer from that. Or there are a few makers out there who produce machines dedicated exclusively to it. It's another plug and play item in your hi-fi system, right? You've got a tape deck, you've got a turntable, you've got a CD player. Well, add this to the mix. Although you will need, in some cases, to add on to your house to be able to fit it, next to the hi-fi system. Problem with some of these, the most notable is a guy in France who operates under a name that is the same as ours, and it costs like $30,000. So that's really aimed at institutions. The Library of Congress has a couple. Edison National Historic Site has got one. Some of the best archives in the country on the on the university level. So, University of California, Santa Barbara, and University of North Carolina, they've got an Archeophone. But it's really out of the reach of most private collectors. We are fortunate enough to where some of our closest friends and collaborators happen to have one. So if it turns out that they've got something that we need for a collection, they can do a better transfer than just about anybody in the world. So we are definitely fortunate to have that kind of relationship with these people.
So when it comes to the original records or the cylinders, after you guys clean them up and transfer them, do you just store them there at your facilities, or do they go to a museum, or maybe auctioned off, or what happens to the originals?
Oh, no. These are in private hands. So they're being cared for by the owners. As Megan pointed out, we have a collection of our own that we have here with us. But for instance, the material that's on Waxing the Gospel I think we contributed one record out of the whole 102. So this was definitely a situation where we needed outside help. And the individuals who own the records have them in their possession. And I must say, museums and archives are doing wonderful work. But in terms of access, the individual collector, the private collector, ends up being the best friend of the public because he or she can, at a moment's notice, make available something that in an archive or an institutional setting may take all sorts of time and navigating red tape to get to.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a fascinating setup, and it's great that you guys are out there doing that. And again, Waxing the Gospel is available now on Archeophone Records. Richard Martin and Megan Hennessy with us, and I'm kind of interested in the legal side of things. When you put out these old records for sale, do you have to keep in mind there might be great-great-great-grandsons out there or somebody that might own the rights somehow?
Well, again, we're talking about recordings from the 1890s. I would say that approximately 80 to 90% of the material on this collection, out of the 102 recordings, probably 80 to 90% are one of a kind. That is to say, we know for a fact that it was a field recording, let's say, which would be by definition one of a kind, or it's something that was more were produced, but another copy has never turned up. So what we're dealing with here are the rarest of the rare, the patrimony, the musical and spoken word patrimony of the United States, being preserved and cared for in private hands mostly, and they're what we call orphan works. Nobody knows who it would have belonged to originally. So, we're going in best faith that, these are the only copies and that preservation is the foremost consideration. In terms of whether J.J. Fisher or Steve Porter, two of the artists on the collection, you might have heirs with rights over a song that they recorded in 1897. That's most definitely not true because nobody received royalties or any kind of consideration for their performances in those days. What we feel really proud of is that we're able to give a little bit of immortality to people who otherwise would be completely forgotten. It's because of Archeophone's work in the far reaches of the recording industry's birth, that some of these people, Len Spencer, J.W. Myers, and Thomas Bott, that they survive at all. Now they're given a second birth.
Well, and actually, if I can jump in here for a second too, in terms of researching and trying to find photos and illustrations, we did a lot of outreach to the families, and we have some great photos of people never before publicly, published photographs. And in a number of the cases, their ancestors didn't know they ever made records.
And with that being said, I know you guys mentioned you have 68 some odd releases already for the label. So is there a lot more out there in the wild, do you think, or other collectors that maybe haven't stepped forward to find some more of these, or are we kind of running out of these old recordings?
We haven't scratched the surface yet.
Yeah, there's a ton. There's a ton, Dustin. I mean, the ideas that we have on our big board here on the wall, goes from top to bottom, and we haven't even started on what looks like 3/4 of them we haven't even started on. So there's plenty. One of the things we didn't mention at the very beginning of the talk is that our special focus is the so-called acoustic era of recording. And by that we mean anything recorded without electricity. In the earliest days, prior to 1925, when when microphones came into the studios. Prior to that time, you had to shout or play your instrument into a large horn, kind of like a large funnel or an inverted dunce cap, right? That took the sound and squeezed it onto through a diaphragm, and from there it would imprint into the wax, right? That's what we do. That's our period, and it's a 35-year period, more or less. There's an enormous trove of material in that area that we deal with, and as we said at the beginning, when we saw, as we contemplated the idea of Archeophone Records, none of this is covered. Nobody's doing it. These are people talk about roots music, blues and country and hillbilly. Well, these are the roots of the roots. This is the stuff that those people were listening to, and honing their chops on, and it's not touched by anybody but us, and we're proud to be serving that need.
Yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be done. As you mentioned, some of these recordings could disappear forever, and you guys are giving the recordings and the artists a new life. And I know the box set Waxing the Gospel is just out now, but you mentioned the big board. Is there something maybe in the works or something you can let us know about?
Well, let's just say this. We have this was our biggest production to date in terms of the number of CDs. There's 3, but also the format. It's as Megan said, it's a 6x9 hardback book of 400 pages, and it looks like an oversized hymnal. So anybody interested in hymns will quickly appreciate the artistic nod there. We've got a couple of things that are going to be even bigger than this. So there's some major things being worked on here, including one that we're doing with the Library of Congress.
Awesome. Well, guys, I guess the last question I would have for you is there a website where we can get more information? And if there's a listener out there maybe sitting on something that you guys could use, how can they get in touch with you?
The website is archeophone.com, archeophone.com. And there's a contact form there, but you can also just email sales@archeophone.com, and you'll get one of us, and we'll answer the questions.
And I would
Facebook and Twitter.
I would say also to your listeners who are well versed in what we've been talking about, to the person to whom we have said nothing new, if that person is sitting on brown wax recordings from the 1890s that he or she doesn't really know what they are, or thinks that there's really no recoverable sound on them, or they think they want to shave them down and resell them as blank wax, think again. Because we have found time and time again that some of the most important recordings were things that somebody almost threw away.
Yeah, and again, definitely fascinating stuff. And again, Richard, Megan, thanks a lot for being on with me today. And I'm still making my way through the set, but I'm really enjoying it, and I appreciate your time today.
Thanks very much, Dustin. It's been a great time.
And again, that was Richard Martin and Megan Hennessy, the folks behind Archeophone Records. Fascinating stuff. The new box set, Waxing the Gospel, is available now.